collecting things like, what did Chris buy, or where is Chris? Right? The fact that I'm in this particular location and I'm a hackathon, maybe they'll send me some particular discounts for tech stuff. I don't know, right? But I'm looking at my behavior and then trying to predict what people are going to do from it. So a bunch of people use this stuff. So in financial services, people do it to collect all your transactions. Not just the ones in which people have done over the last 3 or 4 months, but everything, right? So what your entire life is. So when you first had the bank account, all the way up to where you are today. And I'm even looking at fraud, and I'm looking at can you afford to buy things, and I'm looking at everything. The telco market is quite interesting because everybody's got a phone, right? And my little phone knows where I am, and my little telecom knows where I am now, right? So now what's happening is you could use this data rather than just looking at the tariffs in terms of what I pay monthly, but is there a way of using the data to look for value? So should Starbucks open up a coffee shop here? Well, maybe, because there's a hackathon every weekend, right? And they have a discount for hackathon people, right? That could be what they do. Healthcare, kind of spotting diseases, right? So let's imagine that there's an outbreak of a disease. Well, what happens is people go to the hospital. So you get 1 or 2 people go, and then suddenly you get 5 or 6 people go, and then they all got the same symptom, and you get an outbreak. But they all have to go to the hospital. This takes time. What if you look at the social network? Because what happens is people go to Twitter or Facebook and say, I don't feel very well. I have these symptoms. And then suddenly, they don't have to go to the hospital anymore, they're just socially telling all their friends, and then you can analyze this and figure out if there's some sort of commonality, sort of outbreak happening in a particular area. So people are doing this sort of stuff. So I thought I'd give you kind of ideas to think about in terms of what you could do this weekend. So what is Hadoop, for those of you who haven't seen Hadoop before? So my good friends at Yahoo kind of were one of the pioneers of Hadoop. And Hadoop pretty much is a key technology within Yahoo. Most of the data inside Yahoo touches Hadoop in some particular way. And what Hadoop allows you to do is store large volumes of data on low-cost commodity hardware. And imagine that if I'm going to be like Yahoo and I'm going to store the entire web and try to index it for search, that's a lot of data, right? So I can't take all that data and push it to one application, because that application just can't cope with that sheer volume of data. So rather than moving the data, what you do is you move the processing to where the data is. So what happens is there's techniques we talk about that allow the code itself to move to where the data is. So this was happening in about 2004. And really to drive innovation, what the guys at Yahoo did was made this completely open source in Apache. So there's an Apache project called Hadoop, which really takes care of the ability to process large volumes of data. And then the challenge is that if you think of what's going to happen now as I'm going to process all this data, and the size of at least the web is growing, but telco market, people using my phone, people on Twitter, all this data is growing, so the number of servers I have grows. Operationally, this becomes a bit of a challenge, because now I've got lots of servers to manage. So again, open source, there's open source projects to allow you to do management monitoring. 2011 is when the core guys of that were building this technology started up a company called Hortonworks, and Yahoo were a big investor. So it is an open source project, and there's a lot of people involved, right, being open source. Right? So there's obviously Hortonworks, there's Yahoo, there's Twitter, there's Facebook, there's Apple, there's a bunch of other people who are involved. So to give you an idea of how you would use this technology, this week I thought I'd give you some practical use cases, and then we'll go into the technology itself and I'll show you some examples. So imagine that I'm going to look at Chris as a particular user, of my website, right? So maybe I'm buying a product, maybe I'm building this new application that Chris is going to be participating in. Well, yes, I can collect what Chris is purchasing, but why can't I collect what Chris is clicking on, collect his behavior, maybe get a better profile understanding of what he does. So what I do is I take these streams, these web logs, or this sensor data, or emails, or social Twitter data, push it into Hadoop, transform that into something in which the database can then consume. Right, so now in the database, I've got a much better understanding of Chris as a user, right, because I've got social data as well. So this is a slightly different approach to what people would have done traditionally, in the sense that if I'm pushing data into a database, what I typically will do is take social data as an example, because it's quite easy to get hold of this weekend. Right? You could take the social data, you could build a little application that does a little bit of processing and filtering, and then pushes it into your database, and then you could get your database to do something. Well, yes, you could do that, but what you'll find is that as you build your application, that your requirements are going to change as you learn, right? As you start using it, you think, well, if I could do this slightly better, maybe I thought about my problem in a different way, now I want to look at the data slightly differently. Well, the challenge is here is that you're changing the business rules way down here, right? So you have to change all the rules down here before it gets into your database. You could have filtered data out because you were listening to a social stream. Now in Hadoop, what you do is you take, let's say, the social network stream from Twitter, you fire it raw into Hadoop, straight into Hadoop. Right? Now Hadoop just stores the data, right? The local storage, and then you transform that data inside Hadoop. Then you push it to your database, and then you use it. Now, as you build your application, you may find that you want to look at the data differently. You still have all the Twitter data, right, from this entire weekend, or even further back if you wanted to get historical data. So you can then just change your transformation because you've still got a place to dump it all, and then you put it into your database. So now you've got all this data, you may then start to say, well, rather than going to the database, are there things in which I could look for, like trends? Like, is there a pattern? Somebody showed me just last night about this nice pretty graph he drew about restaurants. What type of restaurants are in Birmingham based upon not only the food, but there were traditional pubs in one area, and there was kind of fresh markets in a different area. He was looking at all this sorts of data and mapping it across the city in terms of wealth and all this other stuff. So you can use this to then explore and look for trends in your data. And what you simply do is you connect things like Excel, or you could build a web application if you wanted to, that uses JDBC or ODBC to connect and start to play around with the data and look for some patterns. I'll show you how that works in a second. You could take it to a little bit more of the extreme. Not many people do this. The big web properties do this in the sense that you could take the new sources of data and then add widgets to your application, like the guys have done here. Other people bought this. Is what they're doing is they're looking at the data. Now they have the data, so they captured it in the first way of using Hadoop. Then they looked for the trends, and then they discovered there's a pattern in products, and then based upon the model that they've built, they can then use that model and expose it out to the web interface. It's quite an advanced use case. There's not many people actually doing that. So really think about Hadoop integrating into your existing architecture. Don't think of it like a database. Think of it as a storage platform that can process and then push to your database. So give you some idea of what Hadoop really is when you get to use it. There's a bunch of components. There's what's known as Hadoop core. So if you go to Apache right now and you type in, well, you go to the Hadoop website, you pretty much get to Hadoop core pretty quickly. Now Hadoop core has two major components. There's a third, but it's still being developed, so you don't really care about that right now. There's HDFS. HDFS is a distributed file system. Imagine I'm putting files into a file system. Put file, get file, do stuff. But unlike a local file system, it's distributed across lots of machines. The more machines you have, the more distributed data becomes. It has replication built into it, just in case there's failure. But ultimately, the way that Hadoop works is that it's going to store files. So this means that it can store pretty much anything, because it could store a weblog, it could store social data, it could store binary data, it could store all sorts of stuff, right? It's just a file system. Dump stuff in. People use it as a dumping ground, right? And then you have MapReduce. So MapReduce is a processing framework that allows you to process the data where the data is. It maps your request to a particular machine where that data is, and then all the mappers go out to all the machines, and then it reduces down to result buses. Right? So that's what MapReduce does. Now you could just use core, and I'll show you that pretty much later on today, is that core is basically expect to write a lot of Java. Like a lot. A real lot, right? So if you want to write loads of code, you can write core. The challenge with core is that, as I say, it's pretty complicated. So if you wanted to use something a little easier, and most people do, is that you start using these components, right? So there's something called Hive. So Hive allows you to do SQL. So you'll pass SQL into Hive. Again, it's an open source project called Hive that converts SQL statements into MapReduce jobs. So rather than you having to write this MapReduce job, Hive will take the SQL and write it for you, and push it down to the server, to the core. You could do Pig, open source. I have funky names. Animals live in a zoo. So Pig is a scripting language called Pig Latin that allows you to do transformations and filters and all sorts of things like that. It's really useful for doing processing of data in terms of transformation. There's HCatalog, which we're going to talk about later on today. If you've got this database in which you want to push data to, there's something called Scoop that allows you to scoop data from and to a database. As HBase is a NoSQL store, and Flume allows you to stream. You can also do monitoring, again open source, which is called Barring. So how do we get started with this, right? How do we actually get going? I'll skip this slide for a second, I'll come back to it. So there's two ways in which you could get going this weekend with Hadoop. Yeah?
So it's related to the previous slide.
Well, I skipped.
Yeah, the way we showing the components.
Yeah.
The one before.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you are storing just files in unstructured data and comparing it to HDFS,
yes.
How are we running queries over it?
So you're completely right. So what you do is you dump the files in HDFS, and they could be, say, a weblog or CSV or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's a log, right? So what you can do is you can use HCatalog. HCatalog allows you to define metadata on how you want to expose the data in terms of structure. So it allows you to define a table, and it says, right, here are the particular fields in which I want to expose from this CSV file, this weblog. Now what people typically do is they push the weblog in, they may transform that with Pig into maybe a different shape, but you always keep the raw data, because you've got a platform to keep lots of data, and then you would apply HCatalog to it to then expose it through Hive.
So that HCatalog is kind of transforming that query on the fly to something that would directly work on the raw data, or do you, as the file comes in, do you take the data, store it somewhere else in a more structured form, and store the raw data?
So what's happening, HCatalog is defining metadata about how you want to access the underlying file.
Yeah.
The file actually gets copied into another location.
So the data is stored twice? Okay.
So how does Hive looks at, obviously the HCatalog, as you're saying, is defining the metadata of how what are the fields we want from the CSV files. So how does Hive looks into for Hive, is it like a general table?
So I've been looking at it as if it was through HCatalog as a general table.
As a general table.
Correct.
Okay.
So you say basically refer to your SQL statement in Hive, select star from customer. Yeah. Which customer is a table defined in HCatalog, right? And then HCatalog goes, I know what that is, like data here. And you can also define tables, HCatalog that can be used by pig. So in this transformation, you can also say log this from pig, which I'll show you in a second. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So there's two ways over this weekend. This weekend that we can get started. So there's something called the Sandbox, which is you can download from. I'll send the link up shortly. Basically, go to the Hortonworks website. It is the Apache components. There's nothing. We don't change anything. You download. It's a VM with it all pre-configured if you wanted to use that. That's a local copy running on your machine, and I'll show you how that works now as I've got some time. Hopefully. Here, so you start the VM up. You can either run it in Fusion or VirtualBox. So I go here. So it's started up on a particular port. It has tutorials in it and videos if you get a little bit lost in terms of how this works. For some reason, I can't see the rest of that page. It's rendering it out. Not sure why that got rendered out. So if I look at the Sandbox, you can see there's particular components at the top. So you see Hive and Pig, HCatalog. You can just go to the command line if you just prefer using the command line. But this is a visual tool to help you get started. So if you click here, you see the file browser, which is basically browsing HDFS. Obviously, I'm running this on my local box, so don't expect it to go fast. So what I've got here is some data from the stock exchange. If I look at this data, you can see it's basically a very simple structured file. So you have the exchange name, stock, and you have the prices. Very straightforward. So if I wanted to load that into HCatalog, so I click on HCatalog, give it a second, create a table. Where am I? Yahoo. So that's the name of the table. So now my SQL statements are going to refer to it as Yahoo, because it's the table name. Point to it where the data is. It's just here. Import the data. So this time it's going to move it. So it's warning this file's going to get removed. That's fine. So now what it's doing is it's loading and moving that file to another location for me. And it's doing a little bit of analysis of the file itself to try to figure out what the structure could be. And it's saying, well, this file is tab delimited. You could change it if it's wrong, but it's had a little guess what it could be. Now it's saying, well, here's a preview of what the table could look like. Are you okay with this? Yes, I am. So now, once it's created the table for me, well, create the definition for me. It's going to ask me what columns I want. So I may decide to drop a column or add a column or change the name of the column or change the type of the column or do something with the column before I create a table. I'm just going to create a table. A bit lazy. So yeah.
It seems it's a a little bit table-like structure, top delimited file, etc. But if it's a little bit more advanced file like JSON or this kind of things, so this structure still works? Or
You can actually, there's a bunch of ways in which you can process JSON quite easily. So you can either process, there's a library for JSON with pig, so you can navigate the JSON document very easily and then generate more output that maybe is different structure. You can also tell HCatalog not through the UI, but through the command line. When you say create table, you can give it the definition of JSON, and it will look at the fields and pull them into it. Yeah.
How long and how easy is it to take to install?
For this, the biggest problem you're going to probably have here today is download. Once you start the VM, you're up and running. There's no installation, it's just a VM, it's already pre-configured. This is pretty much out of the box, what I've shown you here.
How big is it?
I want to say about 2 gig. Yeah. So now you can say, right, I can access this data, so select star from Yahoo. Hopefully with a bit of luck this is going to work. Yeah. So, there's the data from, next page. So I can now execute queries against it, right? And I can do joins and I can do a bunch of stuff like that. But the thing to remember, at least the current version of Hadoop, is it's more focused on batch processing and then pushing your data to another database. So if you do have a lot of data, it's not going to go particularly fast, right? Pretty on VM, yeah.
Can you update or insert?
So the way in which it works is there's no concept really of an update. There is create more files, right? So you just create another file because it's the way in which processing works. You can keep creating files. You can't update an existing file because processing model will just break. You can also remove files from the file system. It's quite straightforward to do.
So, sorry, when you created this table, that file was processed, that data was extracted, and then I suppose another table file was created somewhere.
Correct. If I actually look in my file system, apps, I believe it's under Hive warehouse. There you go. Let's see what's copied in here. Let's see the file was copied here, and then it's working metadata of that particular file I copied in. So this is what's this? This is the sandbox. I'm going to actually do more of a tutorial on this and a workshop with some more data this afternoon. But you can also this weekend you have access to HDInsight, which is Microsoft's Hadoop platform. Very similar, not quite. Obviously, it's a hosted platform, so there's no installation at this point. I will send you the credentials in a second. But what you can do is, let's try interactive console. So you can. The nice thing about this is that it also supports JavaScript. So you can do Hive, obviously. So you can say select style from wherever you wanted to. The resolution is a bit screwed on the machine. Or I can do JavaScript. So I can say. Let's do help for a second so you can see the commands. This is just pure JavaScript. So what I can do is maybe I have a MapReduce job that I've written in Java that I can upload and then say run my job, or I can show my job listings, or I can do things like ls, which shows me the files in the file system. I can do think off the top of my head fs.put, and it will allow me now to pick a file on my local file system, and then I will upload it in a destination that I've provided. You can actually do quite a lot with a JavaScript interface, so you could actually start writing MapReduce jobs in JavaScript if you wanted to. There's a bunch of tutorials that are actually in the platform, and I'm going to walk through some more this afternoon. What else is in here? which one we got here. We've obviously got some monitoring. This is a shared platform, so I've only got one credential, so you can execute jobs and put files. It's just it's a 4-node cluster, so it should be totally fine for this weekend. But if everybody started to delete files, and it's going to get messy. But what you can also do is you can remote desktop onto the machine. Currently it doesn't work off my Mac, and I don't understand why, but it doesn't. Or if you had a Windows box, rather than having to use the JavaScript to upload files, what you can do is you can install this little application that actually integrates into Windows Explorer, and you can start dropping files into the distributed file system, which is quite nice. Sends a bunch of documentation here. So to get to this stuff, I mentioned that. The sandbox is a Hortonworks sandbox. Is everything downloaded as a VM. If you want to use it as a service, the URL for the service is here. And the password is admin Hortonworks $23. It is a public service, so anyone can hit it. And if you want some sample data, there's a bunch of data here, some census data, which is quite interesting. There's financials data from the World Bank that's completely open and you can play around with. There's also a load of people talking about APIs this weekend, about the BBC, who else is here? Expedia. There's a lot of people here talking about how to use their APIs. You can start thinking about using their APIs and maybe throwing some data into Hadoop, playing around, transforming it a little bit, and then seeing what you can build. So with that, I believe I'm actually out of time. So I had half an hour. But do you have any questions? Do you have any ideas that what you may want to build?
Is there a way we can access like URL to check these places, or do we have to move them?
That's a good question. I'll ask one of the guys from Yahoo if they've got some screen or something that they can put them on, because that would be useful. I hope they do, because otherwise I'll start tweeting it out. Yeah.
So what kind of, so I've never really used Hadoop before.
That's fine.
So what kind of, say I'm a mobile developer, so say I was wanting to do some processing on Hadoop for some big data stuff or something, what kind of requests then would it accept from say a mobile device?
So what you could do from a mobile device is not actually on the mobile device itself, but when your application is, you might have a log that you want to analyze, right? The access log of the application. You might take that access log and throw that into Hadoop, right?
Or could I, for example, send like an HTTP post request?
Oh, you could, absolutely.
You do something and then that's in JSON back.
So you could. So you would send, well, typically in Hadoop, what you would do is you'd be sending, let's say, as people are going through that application, you'd be sending in requests. And then requests may be something that's behind the scenes, just sending what the guy is doing. And then you may query it later on to say, is there an appropriate advert or appropriate thing I want to display because of the data which I've analyzed? Now the thing to remember about Hadoop is when you give it that query, if you went straight to Hadoop, it may take a while to execute. And I mean, a while, it could take 20 minutes. It could take an hour, right? And so typically people then push the data in and maybe stream it in over HTTP one at a time. And you do that with something called Flume. It captures the data, and then each request gets written to a file, and the file gets a certain size, and then the file gets processed.
So it would be used for something like, you send it, I don't know, for example, a product you want to find, and it would be able to condense a load of stuff instantly from a load database and send back a result instantly.
No, that's not what it will be doing. Thinking more of analytics.
Right.
I'm not sure.
No, I'll attend the workshop later, and maybe I can make some more stuff later. Cheers.
I have another question.
Sure.
On the VM that you showed that you could make high volume queries, but can you run as plain Hadoop job, like just maybe telling upload Java classes that you need or a jar,
Yes.
and then run the Hadoop job?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not using any other interface but just plain Hadoop?
Yes, you can. Absolutely, you can. That's how people get started in terms of when they first look at Hadoop. You'll see people go to the Hadoop core website because they're all individual projects. I've actually got a slide with that one. So they're all little individual projects. They all have their own life cycle. So if you go to Apache, you'll see them all independently. You can just use core and just write a MapReduce job and then push that jar file in and it will just execute. Typically what happens, well actually not typically, always what happens is that you get the MapReduce job to load some data in, do some processing, and then it will write data somewhere else. And it could write to the output stream, but typically it writes to the file system itself.
But, well, I guess it would write it in the VM on the background you would have Hadoop cluster and then HDFS.
Correct. So
and
it,
you would write it there, so you can browse the HDFS from the
Yes, you can.
interface?
Yeah. So if you're using the sandbox, then you just, it doesn't know that there's no other machines, it just thinks it's running on itself, a machine that's happens to be itself. That's how it works. There is a full Hadoop environment on that VM, so there's nothing missing. So you can't, I've even seen people do stuff like plugging Excel on the top of the sandbox or plugging Tableau. One of the guys in another hackathon I was in, they took a load of a sandbox and chained loads together. And technically you could, it's a bit of a hack, but you can, just to give them a bigger Hadoop environment across all their friends, right?
Okay, so I guess, yeah, the sandbox is just a web interface, but you have a full
absolutely.
or whatever, so you can get a console and
yeah, so if I just do that for you right now, it's straightforward enough. If I just go to the address, I never remember what it is. So here's the IP address, and SSH. Obviously you can't SSH on HTTP. I think it's root. And the password, ready. Secret password. Hadoop. Hey! Right, so I can do pig from here.
right.
There you go. So it's basically pig what? So now, because we're like flunky open source guys, the idea of pig, well, the console's got a grunt. Right? Come on. Right. So, they're funky things. So now you can put your script in here. Also has Hive. Let's see if you do Hive. Then you can just pass SQL statements to this one if you want to do that. You also have complete HDFS here. So I can do Hadoop. If I can spell Hadoop correctly. Hadoop FS minus LS. And there you go. That's what particularly I have in my file system, right? So Hadoop is when I want to run FS because I'm interacting with the file system, and then you have commands like ls, cat, put, get files, that sort of stuff. So you have a complete environment here. So yeah, you can knock yourself out with a sandbox. Anything else? No? Okay, well I'm going to be around for the rest of the day. So I'm doing a workshop at 1:30. Now, in that workshop what I'm going to do is start writing MapReduce jobs, and then start writing some more pig and more Hive, and then get you to have a chance to play around with the technology.
In this room?
I don't know. Maybe.